In this topic, you will learn how to manage mono or multi-legislation and about the legislation code field and how it is used with legislation. The Activity Code LEG enables the management of mono or multi-legislation. This code is used to activate the multi-legislation management. When the code is active, a legislation level is displayed on some parameterization screens and used to determine certain management rules. Inside a folder, it is necessary to set up a legislation code and management rules before any data entry can begin. When setting up multi-legislation, you need to manage its principal components, localization for legal requirements, and languages allowed. These elements have an impact on functions and data available in the folder. For example, the legislation code field has been added, functions have been added, and customizations related to the legal requirements corresponding to legislation chosen have been added. Legislation can be used to filter data as well as lock records into a specific legislation to ensure that certain options are only available to that legislation. The Legislation Code LEG field is managed as a key element. The LEG field is put as a primary key in different tables and functions and is linked to the Activity Code LEG. Let's take a look at legislation in your system. To review a folder's legislation setup, we will select the Folders function under the Setup menu. We'll select our seed folder and come to the Options tab. Notice we do have the LEG Activity Code, Multi-Legislation Management, is set to active. If we scroll down, we have 2 pages of localizations that are also turned on. On the Initialize tab, we have the languages that have been set up for this particular folder. Beneath that, we have the legislations that have been activated for this folder. There are 2 pages. If we would like to add another legislation, we simply come down to the empty line and enter in our legislation and then save our changes. Once we've saved our changes, we need to hit the validation. This validation can be a very lengthy process. Beneath the legislation, we also have default values for language and country. Let's take a look at legislation as it's being used in our system. We're going to come into the payment entry types underneath Setup. During folder creation, or if adding a legislation into an existing folder, elements linked to the legislation code and the empty LEG field is downloaded. The legislation code is used to deliver features to a function. If we select our receivables, we can come in and look at our different payment entry types or receipt entry types. Notice they have different legislations assigned to them. You can also have a blank legislation, which is a legitimate legislation. A blank legislation means this particular entry screen would be used for all legislations. We can also use legislations to filter. We'll come in and look at our tax rates. If we want to filter by legislation, we can do so. And notice once again, we do have our legislation on our fields. In this topic, you have learned how to manage multi-legislation inside a folder and use the legislation code field.